Dating today looks very different than it did even 20 years ago. Dating apps, social media, shifting expectations. Many people who sincerely want marriage are finding that the path toward it feels more confusing than ever before.
Yeah, Debbie, we're not imagining this. Research backs up that about half of single adults today say that dating's harder than it was just 10 years ago. So what's changed, right? What's happening where it's so different? And how could people still build strong, lasting relationships in the middle of what has become actually really pretty complex?
That's right. It's a big question. So, in this episode, we're going to explore the realities of modern dating, from endless options and fear of vulnerability to changing expectations about commitment.
Yeah, there's a lot of apprehension, I think, about this. And so we want to talk about what still works, because even in a complicated dating world, many people are still finding love and building strong marriages every day.
Join us as we talk about dating for marriage in a complicated world.
Do you sometimes feel lost in your relationships, your identity, or even your spirituality? Welcome to Gilmore&green, where healing and hope meet.
We are marriage and family therapists and relationship experts who care deeply about helping you grow, strengthen your relationships, and deepen your sense of meaning and spirituality.
We long to share from our clinical experience, years of training and solid research, including ideas about how to strengthen the things that matter the most to all of us in life.
We're so glad you're here. Our hope is to share simple, meaningful ideas that support you in your healing and in your growth. Welcome to Gilmore&green, where healing and hope meet.
Today, we're talking about something a lot of people are quietly struggling with: dating for marriage in today's world. Research shows us that the average person now spends almost a decade longer dating before getting married. People are getting married later, especially than they did way back in 1960, 1980s. I'm guessing when you and I got married, Debbie. At the same time, about half of singles say that dating has actually become harder, even compared to just 10 years ago. I have a daughter who's been widowed and unfortunately has been thrown back into the dating world 10 years later than when she first dated her husband. And I've just watched her over the years and seen for myself how much more complicated it has become and much more difficult. And so today we want to talk about what has changed and why maybe dating does feel so complicated today.
Yes, we're going to explore some of the reasons behind that. And first, let's take a look at a few other interesting statistics that help paint a picture of what's happening in the dating world right now. The first one I want to talk about is marriage is actually happening later than ever before, almost a decade later than 20 years ago. So today, people are spending about 10 more years dating before getting married than they did just a few generations ago. One of the biggest shifts in the dating world is simply how much later people are getting married. In the United States today, the average age for a first marriage is about 30 for men and 28 for women. Back in 1960, it looked quite different: 23 for men and 20 for women. So, compared to previous generations, many people are now spending close to a decade longer navigating the dating world before marriage.
And that's so interesting to me, Debbie. I'm going to ask you how old you were when you got married. I was 19. How old were you?
I was 21 and I thought I was so old.
It's just we're indicators of, that earlier dating age and marriage age, many years ago. Another statistic that we want to add to the one you've just talked about, Debbie, is that now online dating is the most common way for couples to meet. And really, for the first time in history, meeting online has become the most common way couples meet, which is a pretty remarkable shift when you think about it. That's a lot to change and navigate. For most of human history, people actually met, as we all know, through natural circles of everyday life. They met through friends, through family, work, school, church, or their local communities. But today, technology has changed that pattern in a very, very big way. There's some good things about it, right? But there's also some things that we need to understand about it. Research shows that online dating has become the most common way couples have met in the United States. And in fact, a large study out of Stanford University, Debbie, found that about 39% of heterosexual couples meet online. So almost 40%, almost nearing close to half, right, are now meeting online. And that means that instead of meeting through family and friends and school and communities, more couples are now meeting through apps or websites than those things. So it really is such an interesting, pretty recent shift in the last 10 years.
Yes, and as I think about it, it feels so much more impersonal to me that a figure that might be several states away from me and we're interacting online, it's a digital interaction. It just feels so removed. And yet, you and I, Sherilyn, do telehealth. We are doing so much online. It's a blessing and it works. So, what we need to do with our old mindset is become more familiar with it and understand it better. Just a couple of decades ago, meeting online was rare and sometimes even viewed with skepticism. So, today it's become completely normal, a part of how relationships begin. This shift kind of opened up opportunities to meet people we might never have crossed paths with otherwise. That's the blessing. But it's also changed the experience of dating. Instead of meeting through shared communities where people already know something about each other because that's what gathered them together, many relationships now begin between two complete strangers looking at profiles on a screen and trusting that the profile is accurate. For many people, that can make the early stages of dating feel a little more uncertain and sometimes a little more complicated.
I'm thinking about this as you say it. I've noticed even in my own personal life how texting someone is so different even than being with someone in person. It's not malicious in any way. There's just a difference to it. I'm even astounded in my own relationship sometimes, the discrepancy between that. And so then you add the element of dating and the intensity of that. And so, yeah, we're looking at some really significant changes in the way that we interact with people. I hear too, again, some of this from my daughter is there's a mindset as people are on dating apps where they're always kind of looking for the next best thing. And so it can be easy to move really quickly through relationships in a way that we really didn't do earlier on when we were meeting more in person. So as you're talking, I'm just thinking about some of the nuances of some of these things that we're talking about. So
Right.
another statistic I want to add to what you've just mentioned, Debbie, is that many singles feel dating has become more difficult. As we're just mentioning, half of single adults today say dating feels harder than it did 10 years ago. Another study from the Pew Research Center found that many singles feel like the dating world has simply become more complicated and more difficult to navigate. That's really important information from studies like this and helps us understand this world for people. They actually shared several reasons for this. Some said it's hard to find someone who is looking for the same kind of relationship that they are. That would be really challenging online to get a sense of, yeah, are we on the same page with things?
Like what you're talking about is what level of commitment, how exclusive do they want to be? Do they want it to be a long distance relationship? One party does, but the other, that's a deal breaker. Yeah, it's so confusing.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you. People mentioned that people online aren't always honest, like you just said, about their intentions, and that leads to even more confusion, disappointment. In fact, that's a big one, I think. There is really a lot of distrust in people's intentions online and, kind of the authenticity of who they really are. Another really important factor that people have to consider today, and this is a big one, is the safety concerns that come up for many people, especially when meeting someone new. Women, I think, especially have to be really careful about this. Make sure that they're meeting in public places, that someone knows that they're meeting someone new. And so, yeah, while the dating apps have made it easier to meet people, they create these kinds of frustrations, this ghosting we just talked about, mixed signals, or feeling like dating has become almost a numbers game, right? And all these factors, they make the process of dating feel even more tiring and more uncertain than it used to. And Debbie, my heart just kind of hurts for everybody in this. As we're discussing this, it's just not an easy world to date in a lot of ways.
And isn't it too? I want to talk about the fact that we have a universal need to connect and not just connect on a surface level. All humans need deeper relationships. And so here these humans are trying to find that, but it's just so complicated. It's just so hard. My heart goes out to them as well, and I'm so grateful. I'm not in that dating realm, but you and I see these people in our offices. And so we want to intently understand what's the differences of our dating world versus now and how to counsel them to find success. So here's another statistic I want to share. Relationships are one of the strongest predictors of well-being. Just as I said, it's a universal need for humans to connect. Loneliness is a predictor of early death. So we've got to figure out how to navigate this new way of connecting with people. After studying people for more than 80 years, there's a Harvard study that came to a pretty simple conclusion, and that is strong relationships are one of the biggest predictors of long-term happiness. Don't we all want that? But even though dating can feel complicated today, research shows that having close, supportive relationships plays a huge role in our overall happiness and health and longevity. So, the Harvard study of adult development, one of the longest longitudinal studies ever done on human well being, found that people who had strong connected relationships tended to be healthier, happier, and more satisfied overall with their lives over time. Now, those relationships turned out to be one of the strongest predictors of long-term well-being. So for many people in the past, dating followed a fairly predictable path. You met someone through friends, church, school, work, or people in your immediate community. You spent time together. You'd get to know each other gradually. As you suggested earlier, Sharilyn, on the online dating world, they'll meet someone and move on quickly before really getting to know them deeply enough to be able to have an emotional connection. So, as in the old way, people got to know each other gradually, built a relationship, and over time started thinking about marriage naturally.
Yeah, as you're talking, you talked about, the clients we see in our room, and there's so much we can learn from them. I love to listen to them, those who are actually doing this. It's just such rich, valuable information and content to listen to those who are actually doing this. I'm just thinking about this as we're talking. We want to dive in a little bit more right now to maybe more of the details as to why dating is this complicated, much more different than it used to be. One of the reasons is that technology has changed how people meet, but there's also cultural expectations around commitment that have shifted. Most people who generally want to get married are finding that the path towards marriage can be really confusing and tiring and very discouraging. And so there's some natural barriers to successful dating and companion seeking that we want to talk about. As we mentioned a few decades ago, people often met their partners in kind of normal circles of everyday life. But these kinds of settings were more natural, for relationships to grow in. They saw people regularly, they got to know each other over time. The ability to find out about shared values and connections through the same community was much easier than it is today. So these are just some of the nuances of why it's so complicated. And I'm curious about more ideas you have.
Well, I want to talk about that the way it used to be, where spending time together, coming back together, sharing activities together. If you think about our favorite romantic movies, that's how it works. They were in, dances and community gatherings, and the dating process was even a little tense. And do I really want to be with you? And, just the whole chase that has changed dramatically. And I love that old way. I think it's just so fun to watch those romantic, the greats that we love, but there are some ways that you can do that online now as well. Today, many of those natural meeting places just aren't as strong as they used to be. People move more often. That's another thing we need to talk about. More jobs are remote. So, for example, if you are hired someplace in another state, they might say, you don't have to move. You can stay where you are and you can work at your home office. Well, because of that, we don't then develop a work family. So many of us spend more time online than in shared community spaces, person to person, in person. Because of that, a lot of people now rely heavily on dating apps to meet someone new, and it's a face that you see first. Now, that's natural because that's how it would happen anyway. But apps make it easier to connect with people you might never have met otherwise. That's the part I love. We're mixing with larger circles. The connections often happen quickly and without the background of shared community. So for some people, that might make dating start to feel a little more like browsing through options, a catalog, than building a relationship over time. So the choices now are so much greater, maybe even overwhelming. There's so many options that technology has dramatically expanded the dating pool. We call it the ocean. There's so many more fish in the ocean. Well, I think, Sherilyn, more accurately, we should have said, yeah, there's so many more in the pond. Now it is an ocean. So through dating apps and social media, people can now see far more potential partners than ever before. That's a positive. At first glance, that might seem like a good thing, but interestingly, if we look at the research, which you and I love, it shows that having too many choices can actually make commitment harder.
No, I love what you just said. And that's true of really everything in life. When we have too many choices everywhere, it makes it harder for us to commit, but especially here. As you were talking about the old movies, You've Got Mail flashed into my mind. Maybe that was the first movie that taught us through Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks, right? That you can find each other online.
That's right. But then they turned it into in person, and that's how it works in this new dating world, right? Thank you for bringing that up because it was possible.
It's the first time I'm like, oh wow, that's a new.
Yeah.
Yeah, so instead of meeting, like you say, a few possible partners through friends or social circles, people are now scrolling through hundreds and even thousands of profiles. I mean, even just saying that is so overwhelming for me to say. I can't imagine what it feels like. And so it feels like there may always be just another option one swipe away. This now makes it harder, as you just said, because there's so many options to deeply invest in the person that you're currently getting to know. This is something I think those who are online dating have to be really aware of, this tendency, this pull to just swipe through and always be looking for the next best thing, and to slow down and really spend the time to find out, is this person someone I want to proceed further with? Psychologists call this the paradox of choice, right? We know this in psychology, that when a certain number of options become overwhelming, then people become more anxious, they feel less certain, and I love this, satisfied with the choices that they do make. And so this is kind of the perfect storm, isn't it, for some of the frustration, the complication of this, because it makes dating feel more like you're searching and comparing versus slowing down and building something meaningful with one person. Another study by Barry Schwartz describes this idea of the paradox of choice, where too many options increase anxiety and reduce satisfaction. So he backs that up. Again, the studies will suggest that these dating apps that we're talking about, although there's some good in it, they do contribute to this decision fatigue and lower investment in relationships. So this is a major part, I think, a major distraction actually to this online dating that we have to be so aware of.
Yeah, I just think of shopping with friends. A simple example. I have a friend who, when I go shopping with her, she gets overwhelmed just walking into a store with all of the choices. And either there's one of two things that she'll do. She'll either just grab something and buy it, not even try it on. She just doesn't want to spend the time. Or she'll say, I'll go shopping later. I'll do it later. So she gives up. It is that paradox of choice and decision fatigue that can happen really to anyone. So, just to be kind of aware of when but there's something else I want to point out and that we want to reinforce. Attraction is important. If there's a certain person that just doesn't, you don't get that spark feeling, that's fine. But interestingly, I'll come across people that'll say, this person that I married so many decades ago was not in the theme that I was looking for. I just totally opposite. So that's the point too, is that you don't want to swipe too fast. You want to give them a chance. But expectations around dating has changed. Let's talk about this difference. 20 or 30 years ago, the expectations around dating and marriage were usually more straight up. It was in high school, you're thinking about, I'm going to get married and have babies. Many people dated with the understanding that relationships were generally moving toward long term commitment or marriage. So the pressure's on. They have to decide, and it has to be, I'm shopping for a husband, I'm shopping for a wife. Today, dating can mean very different things, really, depending on the person. And some people are dating casually, some are still figuring out their identity or life direction. So, what they're doing is shopping for a friend, really, someone that is also looking for their identity and they just want to have some fun with an exclusive other. Others are dating very intentionally, hoping to find that spouse because often people come into dating with different expectations. It can sometimes lead to confusion, even disappointment, especially when two people will realize they're hoping for different outcomes from the relationship. That can be deeply depressing and discouraging.
You talk about some of this. I'm thinking most people, if they're dating, as we talked about, into their 30s, they already have a lot of other things going on in life. This is an additional pressure and stress because we do need someone, we need our person, right? And so this is just a small slice of someone's probably typical life that I'm just thinking about everything that they're probably navigating on top of dating. And again, just so much compassion for those doing this. Another reason that dating can feel harder today, Debbie, is that many people come into new relationships already carrying some relational pain.
Right.
Because dating is happening later and longer than it usually did, 20 or 30 or 40 years ago. Now people have had experiences where they have had some relational pain. Some have had really traumatic breakups, betrayals, divorce, family instability. Those things are pretty common now. And so a lot of adults approach dating with a little more caution and self-protection. Because of this, it takes longer to trust people. They share less of themselves early on, or they pull back quickly when something feels uncertain. So that's another really interesting dynamic of this. And one, go ahead.
I would just love to talk about this adult bonding process that you and I already know needs to be intentional. It needs to begin again. Little babies bond with their caregiver instantly within the first seconds of life and naturally progress toward all the interactions become a bonding experience. Now we're in our adulthood and we need to go through that same process of bonding. And so if there's any trauma or pain or feelings that get in the way of that, it can compromise the adult bonding experience. So I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yeah, thanks for, I love that you're talking about the bonding part of this. And so because of that, this caution that we feel or that people feel, it makes a lot of sense, right? It's a way that they actually are protecting their heart. That makes so much sense as you've just described things, but it also makes it harder then for real emotional closeness to develop, especially in those early stages of a relationship. I love this next thing I want to talk about. The expectations for marriage are higher, right? Interestingly, even though dating has become complicated, our expectations for marriage has also grown. In previous generations, marriage was built around kind of a practical partnership of raising children, sharing responsibilities, and building a home and life together. But today, many people hope their spouse will be many things at once. They want a romantic partner, a best friend, someone they can share their deepest feelings with, a co-parent, someone who brings meaning and fulfillment to their lives. And I don't know if we're going to talk about this later, but I think there's also a lot of financial expectations
Yeah.
facing, people getting married. They feel like they should have a fair amount already established and on their way, where for you and I think we had $7 or something, to our name, and you just buckle your seatbelt and start. But I think there's a lot of expectations in place for people to feel like they're ready to get married.
So many fears surrounding that. And I wanted to also pause for a minute here. What we're outlining is all the things to be aware of. This contributes to those first conversations, to just bring up these things and find out where you are in line with someone and maybe adjustments can be made, but it's awareness first of all the challenges, and then your strategy might change to a healthier, more successful way of dating online. So all those hopes that you outlined just now, Sherilyn, the hopes for marriage and what it will look like. Everyone brings those expectations. And I'm going to say, regardless of if it's online or if it's an in-person meeting, and those hopes are beautiful, but they also raise the stakes. It's almost as if they're expecting an ideal. When people feel like they need to find the perfect match, good luck, because perfect isn't possible. But if they want to find the perfect match who can meet all of those expectations, the decision about who to commit to can start to feel a lot more overwhelming. And this also applies to the old way of dating. I always told people, and still tell people in my office, could you set that list aside and or reduce it and maybe make it more realistic so that it fits your values and morals rather than these high expectations. For example, Sherilyn, the $7 you and I had in our pocket, we didn't give it a second thought. We just thought, if we love each other and we are, have enough under our belt as far as knowledge and experience, then certainly we can make those dollars grow. And yes, you can, but to expect perfection and to expect that you're going to marry that count or that earl or that king or that prince is much more unlikely. So now let's switch a little bit to something you and I really appreciate, and that's the fear of vulnerability and being open.
We're going to pause right here for today. In this first half of the conversation, Sharilyn and Debi laid out the facts. Dating is harder today. Between endless online profiles, the paradox of choice, and delayed timelines, the modern dating pool can feel incredibly difficult to navigate. Next week in part 2, we are diving into the emotional side of dating for marriage. We'll explore the fear of vulnerability, attachment styles, and how to tell the difference between temporary chemistry and lifelong compatibility. Subscribe and tune in next week for the rest of the conversation.